Hello, dear friends. Today I continue to bring you an interesting story that you will love. Fasten your seatbelts, and our train will depart now. Ethan Carter leaned against the glass window of his Manhattan penthouse, staring at the city lights that mirrored his sleepless mind. His fortune was built on ambition, strategy, and relentless determination. Yet tonight, none of it mattered. A storm of anger brewed inside him. Emma Collins, the woman he once trusted with his heart, had shattered his faith in love and loyalty. Months ago, she had left him for a rival, a man who offered her more excitement and thrill but far less stability. Ethan clenched his fists at the thought. Excitement, she'd said. He had poured his soul into crafting a future for them, only to be discarded like a useless tool. It wasn't just the betrayal that haunted him. It was the public humiliation she inflicted. The whispers, the gossip, the pitying stares. It all festered like an open wound. That night, Ethan decided to act. Emma needed to see he had moved on, found someone better, someone who embodied everything she wasn't. His plan took shape. He would marry a woman who was Emma's polar opposite, someone humble, genuine, and untouched by the artificial glamour Emma adored. It wouldn't be a union of love, but a strategic move to assert his dominance and control the narrative. The next morning, as Ethan walked through the lush grounds of his estate, the scent of roses filled the air. That's when he noticed her, Lila Harper, the gardener. She was crouched beside a row of hydrangeas, her hands caked with soil. Lila's movements were deliberate, her focus unwavering. The sunlight caught her profile, highlighting a natural beauty that needed no embellishment. Ethan stopped, observing her in silence until she broke it. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said politely, looking up from her work. "Good morning, Lila," he replied, the sound of her name unexpectedly intriguing. "How long have you been working here?" "Almost 2 years," she answered, brushing dirt from her gloves. "I've been maintaining the garden since the renovation." Ethan nodded, but found himself intrigued by her authenticity. Lila had a quiet dignity, a resilience that Emma never possessed. Over the following days, Ethan sought her out, finding excuses to start conversations. He learned she cared for her ailing mother, working tirelessly to cover her medical expenses. Her strength, though understated, was undeniable. One afternoon, as Lila cleaned her tools, Ethan decided to propose his plan. "Lila, I need to talk to you about something important," he began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. She looked up, curious. "What is it, Mr. Carter?" He hesitated, then said bluntly, "I need a wife." Her reaction was a mix of shock and disbelief. "To me?" she asked, half laughing as though he were joking. "Yes," Ethan said firmly, "but it won't be a real marriage." He laid out his plan in meticulous detail, a contractual arrangement where Lila would be his wife in name only, helping him prove to Emma and the world that he had moved on. In exchange, Ethan would cover her mother's medical expenses and provide financial security. Lila crossed her arms, her voice steady and unyielding. "This isn't right. You're asking me to help you settle a grudge." "It's more than that," Ethan replied calmly. "You need the money for your mother, and I need this arrangement. It's a mutually beneficial deal." Lila shook her head. "A hollow deal," she said, her tone firm and resolute. Ethan realized convincing her wouldn't be easy. Her principles were unshakable. But he also knew her love for her mother was stronger than her disdain for him. That evening, Ethan had a detailed medical report sent to Lila's home, along with a letter outlining the terms. The next morning, she appeared at the estate, holding the envelope. "You're a cold man, Mr. Carter," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I won't let my mother suffer because of my pride. I'll do it. I'll accept, but let's be clear. I'm only doing this for her," Lila said firmly, her gaze unwavering. Ethan nodded, satisfied. It'll be good for both of us. Trust me. Lila let out a bitter laugh. Trust you? That's asking for too much. With the contract signed, the plan was set in motion. Ethan believed he had everything under control. Lila, however, felt a mixture of relief and unease as she returned to tending the garden. Deep down, she sensed she had just stepped into something far bigger than she could imagine. Ethan watched her from his window. To him, Lila was the perfect pawn in his game. What he didn't realize was that by manipulating fate, he was inviting changes even he couldn't predict. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of glittering lights and Manhattan's elite. Every detail of the evening had been planned to perfection by Ethan Carter. The extravagant buffet, the lavish decor, and the buzz of chatter were all carefully curated to send one clear message. He was back, stronger than ever. And this time, he wasn't alone. When Lila walked into the room at Ethan's side, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned toward the couple, and murmurs rippled through the room. She wore a simple blue gown that highlighted her natural beauty, contrasting sharply with the ostentatious attire of the other women. Her hair was styled modestly, and she carried herself with a mix of nervousness and quiet strength. "Remember, Lila," Ethan murmured as they walked. "Just smile, and I'll handle the rest." Lila forced a small smile, feeling the weight of every stare. She could feel the silent judgment of the room, as if the verdict had already been decided. She didn't belong. Among the guests, Emma Collins stood out. She wore a striking red dress, making sure no one overlooked her. When her eyes met Ethan's, a sly, venomous smile curved her lips. She approached, champagne glass in hand. "Ethan, darling," Emma purred, her tone syrupy yet sharp. "What a surprise to see you looking so refreshed." "Emma," Ethan replied coolly, "I see you haven't changed a bit." She laughed, brushing off his jab. "And this must be your fiancé." She turned to Lila, her gaze appraising and cutting. "What an interesting choice." Lila felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, Ethan interjected. "Lila is everything I could ever want in a wife. Authentic, loyal, and above all, real." His words landed like a knife to Emma's ego. Her tight smile barely masked her resentment. As the evening progressed, Lila tried to navigate the crowd. Conversations often veered toward passive-aggressive remarks or veiled questions. "So, you were a gardener?" one woman asked in an affected tone, her smile insincere. "Yes," Lila replied, lifting her chin. "An honest job I've always been proud of." Her straightforward response left the woman momentarily stunned before she hastily changed the subject. Despite feeling out of place, Lila's authenticity began to win over a few of the guests. From a distance, Ethan watched her closely. He had anticipated that Lila might falter or make some mistake, but instead, she carried herself with quiet courage and dignity. It unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully understand. She wasn't just playing a role, she was beginning to stand out on her own. The evening's tension peaked when Emma approached Ethan again. "Can I steal a moment of your time?" she asked, her tone deceptively sweet. He followed her out onto the balcony, away from the crowd. Once alone, Emma's mask fell. "So, this is what you've resorted to," she sneered. "Lowering yourself to this just to provoke me?" "This has nothing to do with you, Emma," Ethan replied evenly. "Oh, please," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "You really think you're fooling anyone? This sham of a marriage? That girl doesn't belong in our world, and you know it." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What bothers you more, Emma? That I'm happy, or that you no longer have any power over me?" Emma stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You can pretend all you want, Ethan, but deep down, you know I'm still the only one who truly understands you." "You're wrong," Ethan said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. And this conversation is over. When he returned to the hall, Ethan spotted Lila near the drinks table, holding a glass of juice. She looked relieved to see him, but there was something in her expression that made him pause. "Are you all right?" he asked as he approached. "Surviving," she replied with a faint smile. Ethan wanted to say more, perhaps offer her some reassurance, but he stopped himself. In that moment, he began to realize that Lila wasn't as fragile as she seemed. The realization intrigued him in ways he wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. The party continued late into the night, but the seeds of change had already been sown. While Lila braced herself for the difficult path ahead, Ethan was beginning to see that his carefully calculated plan might become more complicated than he'd imagined. As for Emma, she wasn't one to back down easily, determined to fan the flames of a fire that could consume them all. Ethan's mansion was massive, a modern castle of glass and steel. But to Lila Harper, it felt like an oppressive labyrinth. Every pristine hallway and every flawless piece of furniture was a glaring reminder. This wasn't her home. It was her first official day living as Ethan's wife, and she already felt the weight of her new reality. The discomfort began early that morning. When she came down for breakfast, the table stretched endlessly before her, adorned with exotic fruits and elaborate dishes she didn't recognize. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," said a stern-faced housekeeper. Her formal tone carried more of a warning than a greeting. Lila forced a smile, masking her nerves. "Good morning," she replied, sitting at the table as the staff exchanged glances. To them, she was still the gardener, a woman who belonged among the flowers, not seated at the head table. Ethan entered the room moments later, perfectly composed in an impeccable suit. His confidence was a sharp contrast to Lila's unease. "I hope you slept well," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "It was different," she replied, unsure how to describe the surreal experience of sleeping in such luxury, yet feeling so out of place. Ethan barely acknowledged her response, his attention already on his phone. To him, their marriage remained a transaction, and Lila a piece in his broader strategy. "We have an event tonight," he said without looking up. "You'll need to be prepared." "An event?" she asked, her tone wary. "What kind of event?" "A dinner with important associates. I need you to look comfortable, confident." Lila raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that?" Ethan finally looked up, sensing the weight behind her question. He sighed. "Just be polite. Smile." Lila bit her tongue to hold back a sharp reply, finishing her coffee in silence. The rest of the day was spent trying to establish some sense of routine in the sprawling mansion, but every attempt reminded her how out of place she was. The staff were professional, but many treated her with a thin veneer of respect, as though waiting for her to slip up. In the living room, Lila overheard two maids whispering while polishing vases. "I don't know how she managed it, marrying him," one said. "It has to be temporary," the other replied, chuckling softly. "There's no way he's serious about this." Lila's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she walked away, pretending not to hear. It wasn't the first time she'd endured such remarks since the announcement of their marriage, but the sting hadn't lessened. That evening, the dinner proved to be yet another challenge. The stylist Ethan had hired chose a stunning, expensive gown for Lila, something elegant but far removed from who she was. Throughout the event, she smiled politely and engaged in shallow conversations, but her discomfort was evident. At one point, she accidentally spilled a small amount of wine on the table. One of Ethan's associates made a sarcastic remark, and Ethan seized the moment to discreetly correct her. "Be more careful," he whispered coldly. Lila straightened, her voice sharp yet controlled. "I'm not a perfect doll, Ethan." Her words caught him off guard, but he said nothing. The tension between them was palpable. When they returned to the mansion, Lila couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. "I get it now," she said, her voice trembling with both frustration and defiance. "You just want me as a trophy to show off," Lila said, facing Ethan in the living room. "But that doesn't mean you get to treat me like I'm less than you." Ethan stared at her, surprised by her boldness. "This isn't about that. You knew what you were getting into when you agreed to this marriage." "Knew?" she echoed, letting out a bitter laugh. "All you did was exploit my need. You don't care about me. You care about how I fit into your plan." "And what's wrong with that?" he shot back, his voice rising. "You knew the terms. Why does it bother you now?" "Because I'm not like you, Ethan," Lila said, stepping closer. "I care. I feel. And if you can't see people beyond how they serve your goals, then you're the one who's losing." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Ethan clenched his fists but said nothing. For the first time, he had no response. Lila turned and walked to her room, leaving him alone in the vast living room. Ethan sat on the sofa, his mind in turmoil. She was right, and the realization unsettled him. Lila wasn't just a pawn in his game. She was becoming something far more significant. That night, they slept in separate rooms. The tension between them remained, unspoken but palpable. The battle had begun, and neither was ready to back down. The car moved smoothly along the coastal road, the sound of the ocean faint in the distance. Silence hung between Ethan and Lila as they headed to a luxurious charity gala, a fundraiser for an educational foundation. Despite the usual tension between them, Lila sensed a subtle shift in the air. She focused on the passing scenery, avoiding unnecessary interaction. "You're awfully quiet," Ethan finally said, his eyes on the road. "Is that a problem?" Lila replied, raising an eyebrow. He sighed softly. "No, I just thought you might have questions about the event." "I don't have any, but thank you for your concern," she said, her voice laced with irony. Ethan suppressed a small smile. Her sharp responses were beginning to feel less like defiance and more like something refreshing. When they arrived at the hotel, Lila was shown to a suite Ethan had reserved for her. The room was stunning, sophisticated and spacious, with a balcony overlooking the ocean. She was momentarily captivated by the beauty of the view, but reminded herself not to get swept up in the luxury. Later, as they prepared for the event, Lila chose a dress that struck a balance between simplicity and elegance. The outfit highlighted her natural charm without being ostentatious. When she descended to the lobby and met Ethan, she noticed the flicker of surprise he tried to hide. "You look very nice," he said curtly, though there was an unsettling sincerity in his tone. "Thank you," she replied, nodding politely. The ballroom was a spectacle of wealth. Men in flawless suits and women draped in extravagant jewelry mingled, exchanging pleasantries behind false smiles. Lila's familiar discomfort began to creep in, but she took a deep breath, determined to hold her ground. To her surprise, Ethan seemed more relaxed than usual. He wasn't micromanaging her behavior or pressuring her, which allowed her to let her guard down slightly. During a break for drinks, the two found themselves at a secluded table. For the first time, their conversation took a different tone. "What was your life like before all of this?" Ethan asked, his voice devoid of its usual formality. Lila hesitated. "Simple," she finally said. "I grew up in a modest neighborhood. My dad passed away when I was young, so my mom and I had to figure things out together. I started working early to help her." She paused, staring at the glass in her hands. "When she got sick, it got harder, but I did what I had to do to take care of her." Ethan listened intently, her words stirring something within him. There was strength in her voice, even as she spoke of hardship. "And you?" she asked, shifting the focus to him. "What was it like growing up with all of this?" Ethan gave a bitter smile. Growing up with money and expectations isn't as simple as it looks. My father pushed me to be perfect. When he passed, I was forced to take over everything, even though I wasn't ready." He paused, a rare vulnerability slipping through. Then came Emma. "I thought I finally had something that—" Ethan finished, his voice softer now. "Not about business or responsibilities, but I was wrong." Lila didn't respond immediately. She studied him, noticing something unexpected, a vulnerability behind his usual facade of control and arrogance. Beneath the layers of his carefully crafted persona was a man carrying burdens he rarely shared. "Sounds like we both had to grow up too fast," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, caught off guard by the understanding in her voice. For the first time, he felt truly seen. Their brief moment of connection was interrupted when Emma entered the ballroom, her arrival commanding attention. She walked confidently toward them, her sharp smile and provocative glint betraying her intentions. "Lila," Emma began in a falsely friendly tone, "you look lovely tonight. Ethan does have good taste after all." "Emma," Lila replied with a calm, steady smile, "you also look striking." Emma let out a light laugh, but the venom in her eyes was unmistakable. "Tell me, it must be such a huge change for you, going from a gardener to the wife of a tycoon. I hope it's not too overwhelming to keep up." Lila took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew Emma's words were meant to provoke her, but she decided not to back down. "It's true, it's a big change," she said evenly. "But I've always believed authenticity stands out, no matter the setting." Emma narrowed her eyes, momentarily disarmed by Lila's composed response. Before she could retaliate, Ethan intervened. "Emma," he said sharply, "why don't you enjoy the party somewhere else? I'm sure someone here will entertain your insinuations." Emma shot Lila one last glare before walking away, visibly irritated. Lila, though nervous, maintained her composure. When she looked at Ethan, she caught a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "Well played," he said with a faint smile. "I won't stoop to her level," Lila replied firmly. "No matter what happens, I won't let anyone disrespect me." Ethan didn't respond immediately, but something shifted within him. Lila was proving to be far more than just a piece in the game he had constructed. She was strong, authentic, and, most surprising of all, unpredictable. As the evening continued, Ethan found himself reflecting on her words and actions. Perhaps Lila wasn't just an ally in his pursuit of revenge. Maybe she was exactly what he needed to rediscover something he had long lost, a real reason to move forward. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the mansion's towering windows. Lila was in the garden, her sanctuary, tending to the flowers that offered her a rare sense of peace. The housekeeper approached, her expression unreadable, and handed Lila an envelope. "This arrived for you, Mrs. Carter." Lila noticed the envelope had no return address. When she opened it, her stomach tightened. Inside was a plain sheet of paper with an elegantly scrawled but cutting message. "You will never be one of us. Stop pretending before it's too late." The words echoed in her mind as she took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. Fear and indignation welled up inside her, but the last thing she wanted was for Ethan to find out. He would either see it as a sign of weakness, or worse, use it against her. She tucked the note away in her bedroom drawer, determined to ignore the provocation. But it wasn't the last. Over the following days, more envelopes arrived. Each message was sharper and more venomous than the last, branding her as an imposter, a fraud, someone unworthy of the Carter name. Despite her unease, Lila held her composure. She knew Ethan's world was full of power games, and showing vulnerability could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Emma made it her mission to remain a constant presence. She attended the same events as Ethan and Lila, always with subtle remarks aimed at undermining Lila's confidence. One afternoon, Emma escalated her game. She showed up unannounced at Ethan's office, claiming to have urgent business to discuss about an old partnership. "Ethan," she said, stepping into his office with feigned urgency, "we need to talk." Emma crossed her legs as she settled into the chair opposite Ethan, her expression calm but calculating. "Make it quick, Emma. I'm busy," Ethan said without looking up from the documents on his desk. Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You and I both know that's not true. You're busy trying to convince everyone and yourself that you're happy with her." Ethan looked up, his gaze cold and unyielding. "What do you want?" "I'm just concerned about you," Emma said, feigning innocence. "Everyone knows Lila doesn't belong in this world. She's going to drag you down. There's still time to fix this." "Fix what?" Ethan retorted, crossing his arms. "Do you think you can just erase what you did and come back as if nothing happened?" Emma leaned forward, her gaze turning seductive. "You know you still think about me. This marriage is a lie, and we both know it." "You're wrong," Ethan replied firmly, his tone final. "And now, if you have nothing else to say, I suggest you leave." Emma left, her frustration evident, but her resolve unbroken. Ethan knew she would try again. That night, while Lila was asleep, Ethan entered her room to retrieve a document he'd left there. As he opened a drawer, his eyes caught sight of a stack of envelopes. Curiosity piqued, he unfolded one and began reading. The contents ignited something he hadn't anticipated: anger. Ethan descended the stairs to his office, clutching the notes in his hand. The cruelty in the messages disturbed him because, deep down, he recognized the tactics he might have used against an opponent. But Lila wasn't his enemy. The next morning, during breakfast, he broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me about these?" he asked, placing the notes on the table. Lila froze, her face flushing with a mix of shame and defiance. "Because it's none of your business," she replied, reaching for the papers. Ethan caught her hand, stopping her. "It is my business. You're my wife, Lila. This affects me, too." "It's not a real marriage, remember?" she shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why would you care?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to articulate his feelings. He didn't know why he cared, but the thought of someone attacking Lila unsettled him deeply. "I'm not going to let anyone treat you like this," he said finally, his voice firm. "No matter what you think of us." Lila stared at him, surprised by the intensity in his tone. For the first time, she sensed that Ethan might be starting to see her as more than a pawn in his game. A few days later, at another high-profile event, tensions came to a head. As usual, Emma seized the opportunity to undermine Lila, making pointed comments about her background in front of the guests. "It's admirable how well you've adapted to this world, Lila," Emma said with a saccharine smile. "I personally would find it intimidating." Before Lila could respond, Ethan stepped in. He placed a protective arm around her and turned to Emma with an icy stare. "You're right, Emma. It is intimidating. But Lila is stronger than anyone here. Stronger than you ever were." The room fell silent. Ethan, known for his reserved demeanor, had never publicly defended anyone so directly. Emma's confident facade faltered, and she walked away, visibly shaken. Lila, though caught off guard, maintained her composure. She glanced at Ethan, noticing a sincerity in his actions that went beyond strategy. That night, as they returned home, Lila broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Ethan replied, meeting her eyes. "I won't allow anyone to disrespect you." There was a warmth in his words that left Lila conflicted. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but something was undeniably shifting between them. The game Ethan had started was slipping out of his control, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the consequences. Sitting on the small sofa in her bedroom, Lila stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The two pink lines seemed to shout at her. Her breath hitched, her mind struggling to process the reality. Pregnant. She squeezed her eyes shut, as though willing the result to change. A whirlwind of emotions engulfed her. Fear, uncertainty, and a flicker of happiness she hadn't expected. Ever since she agreed to marry Ethan, her life had been a chaotic whirlwind. A child was the last thing she'd imagined, or wanted, especially now. The weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on Lila. For hours, she debated how to tell Ethan. He was a calculating man, meticulous in his control over every aspect of his life. How would he react to the news of her pregnancy? Would he see it as an inconvenience or, worse, a manipulative attempt to trap him in a relationship that had started as nothing more than a contractual agreement? Later that day, Ethan returned to the mansion after a long meeting. He found Lila in the garden, sitting on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a tree. Her pale face and distant expression immediately caught his attention. "Is everything okay?" he asked, noticing her unusual demeanor. Lila hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "We need to talk," she said at last, looking up at him. "This sounds serious," Ethan replied, his expression growing more rigid. She took a deep breath, summoning her courage. I'm pregnant." The impact of her words was immediate. Ethan stood frozen, the information hitting him like a wave. His face shifted through a range of emotions: surprise, doubt, fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "I am," Lila replied, crossing her arms as though bracing herself for his response. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ethan began pacing, his thoughts racing. He had prided himself on planning every detail of his life, but this was something completely unforeseen. "What are we going to do?" he finally asked, stopping to face her. "I'm going to have this baby," Lila said firmly, "but I don't expect anything from you. I don't want you to think I'm using this to manipulate you." Her words hit harder than he anticipated. He knew Lila wasn't the type to scheme, but the idea that anyone might think so irritated him deeply. "Don't say that," he replied, his tone serious. "This child is mine too, and I will take responsibility." Her gaze softened, but caution remained in her posture. She wasn't sure if she could trust his promise. In the days that followed, Ethan wrestled with his new reality. The idea of becoming a father was foreign to him, and he struggled to navigate the flood of emotions it brought. Yet, as the days passed, he began to see the pregnancy as something more than a challenge. It was a chance to reassess his priorities. For the first time in years, he questioned the emptiness of his relentless pursuit of revenge. But not everything would go smoothly. Emma, always watchful, caught wind of the news. Seeing it as an opportunity to destabilize Ethan and Lila's relationship, she made her move. At a social event, Emma approached Ethan with her usual air of superiority. "Congratulations, Ethan," she said sweetly, her tone dripping with venom. "I hear you're going to be a father. Seems Lila is cleverer than I thought." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What are you trying to say?" "Oh, nothing," Emma teased, tilting her head theatrically. "I just find it curious how quickly she got pregnant." "Don't you?" "Watch what you say, Emma," Ethan replied, his tone low and threatening. "I'm just saying," she continued with mock innocence, "some women know how to secure their position. A baby always changes the rules of the game, doesn't it?" Ethan's fists clenched tightly, but he remained silent. He knew exactly what Emma was trying to do, plant seeds of doubt in his mind. But for the first time, he realized how trivial her games truly were. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Ethan found Lila in her room. She was sitting on the bed, a book in her hands, though her distracted expression suggested she wasn't reading. "Emma knows," Ethan said bluntly. Lila looked up, startled. How did she find out? It doesn't matter, he replied, sitting beside her. What matters is that she'll try to use it against you. Lila sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. Of course she will. All she wants is to destroy us. She won't succeed, Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. Lila looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his expression. For the first time, she felt that Ethan might genuinely be committed to something beyond his revenge. The pregnancy had changed everything. It brought challenges, but also the possibility of a new beginning. While they were still navigating turbulent waters, something in the air suggested that, together, they might find a way forward. Together, they felt they could face whatever challenges came their way. The afternoon sky was heavy with gray clouds when Ethan received an unexpected message from Emma. She requested a meeting, claiming she wanted to settle unfinished business. Ethan knew it was risky to agree, but her choice of words piqued his curiosity. Despite knowing Emma was a master manipulator, part of him hoped this meeting might offer the closure he'd long sought. They arranged to meet at a secluded, upscale restaurant far from curious eyes. Ethan arrived first, as always, and chose a corner table that gave him a clear view of the entrance. Outwardly composed, his mind raced, analyzing what Emma might want this time. She arrived a few minutes later, her confidence evident in her stride and the carefully chosen dress that demanded attention. Her familiar smile no longer stirred the emotions it once had in Ethan. "Ethan," she greeted, sliding into the chair opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you for coming." "Get to the point, Emma," he replied bluntly, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "No need to be so cold. After everything we've been through, don't you think we deserve an honest conversation?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Honest? That was never your strong suit, Emma." She laughed, though it sounded hollow, and quickly regained her composure. "I know I've made mistakes, but we're human, aren't we? Mistakes don't define us. They can be redeemed." "Is that a speech, or are you trying to justify yourself?" He shot back, crossing his arms. Emma paused, her eyes studying him. For the first time, she noticed he wasn't playing her game. He didn't look hurt or angry, just indifferent. "I still care about you," she said, softening her voice. Ethan scoffed, unconvinced. "If you cared, you wouldn't have betrayed me." "It was a mistake," Emma exclaimed, her facade beginning to crack. "I was confused, and you were so focused on work, so distant." "This isn't about what I did or didn't do, Emma," he interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. "You chose to betray me. And it wasn't just me. It was what we had, what we built." Emma averted his gaze briefly but quickly recovered. "And now you're with Lila, a woman who has no idea what it's like to live in this world. She's convenient." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk about her." "Why not?" Emma pressed, leaning forward again. "Because you know it's true. Ethan, look at me. You and I are the same. Lila doesn't understand your ambition, your need for control. She won't last." A heavy silence followed. Emma expected her words to strike a chord, to plant seeds of doubt. But to her surprise, Ethan leaned back and smiled, a cold, almost pitying smile. "You know what's funny, Emma?" he began. "For the longest time, I thought I needed you. I thought your betrayal meant I wasn't good enough." Emma tensed, unsure of where he was going. "But now I see my obsession wasn't love. It was ego," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "I couldn't stand losing because it felt like failure. But today, you mean nothing to me." The words hit like a thunderclap. Emma's composure faltered, her hands trembling as she struggled to mask her frustration. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice almost desperate. "I'm more serious than ever, Ethan replied, standing. Our past is over, Emma. My present is with Lila. Emma froze as Ethan reached for his coat, preparing to leave. But before he could step away, she played her final card. What if everyone knew the truth about your marriage? She said, her voice dripping with venom. Ethan stopped but didn't turn around. What do you think will happen when people find out it was all an arrangement? That Lila is only with you because you paid her? Slowly, Ethan turned to face her, his expression colder than ever. If you think you can threaten me, then you're more desperate than I thought, Ethan replied coldly. You have a lot to lose, Ethan, Emma countered, trying to regain her composure. And you have nothing to gain, he shot back before walking away without a glance. Emma remained alone at the table, the weight of her defeat sinking in. For the first time, she realized Ethan was no longer the man she once knew. He had changed, and the control she once wielded over him was gone. Back at the mansion, Ethan found Lila in the garden, watering the plants. When she saw him, she immediately noticed the tension in his shoulders. Did something happen? She asked, setting the watering can aside. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. Emma tried to threaten us. Lila crossed her arms. What does she want now? Nothing she can have, he replied, his gaze lingering on her. There was something in his expression that made her both uncomfortable and curious. I told you I can handle this on my own, she said firmly. Lila, he interrupted, his voice softer than usual. You don't have to handle this alone. She stared at him, startled by the sincerity in his tone. Despite the doubts she still harbored, there was something genuine in his words that she couldn't ignore. That night, as Ethan reflected on the day's events, he realized something had shifted within him. For the first time, he wasn't consumed by the past. For the first time, he wanted something real, and that something was beginning to take shape with Lila by his side. The morning in the Carter mansion was unusually quiet. Lila sat at the breakfast table, flipping through a gardening magazine, trying to shake off the unease that had been gnawing at her for days. Something felt off. Her instincts were proven right when Ethan's phone buzzed sharply from the other end of the table. He answered quickly, and the alarm in his voice immediately caught her attention. How did this get to the press? He demanded, standing abruptly. Find out who leaked it and fix it. Now. Lila watched, her worry growing as the scene unfolded. When Ethan ended the call, his face was tense and troubled. What happened? She asked hesitantly. It's about us, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. Someone leaked the details of our contract to the media. The words hit Lila like a physical blow. Before she could process their meaning, her phone buzzed with a flood of notifications, messages, missed calls, and news alerts. The marriage of magnate Ethan Carter and former gardener Lila Harper, financial arrangement, or true love. Sources reveal it all started with a contract. Her stomach churned as she skimmed the headlines. The details of their arrangement were exposed, accompanied by cruel speculations about her intentions and demeaning remarks about her background. It was Emma, Lila said, her voice low but certain. All signs point to her, Ethan replied grimly. But we'll handle it. I'll deal with the lawyers and the journalists. Handle it? Lila echoed, her voice rising with disbelief. You think you can control what people are saying about me? About us? Ethan tried to approach her, but she stepped back. You knew this could happen, she continued, her voice trembling. From the beginning, you played with my life like I was just another piece on your chessboard. I never wanted this to happen, Ethan said earnestly. I'll protect you and the baby, no matter what it takes. Protect? Lila let out a bitter laugh. The only thing you've ever protected is your ego. Without waiting for his response, she turned and left the room, heading straight to her bedroom. There, she began packing a suitcase, her hands trembling as she folded clothes and grabbed essentials. Ethan found her shortly after. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm leaving," she replied without looking at him. "You can't leave," he said, stepping closer. "Not now. Not alone." "I can't stay here," Lila said, finally facing him. "All I ever wanted was to care for my mother and live a simple life. But you dragged me into your world, exposed me, and now I'm a target." "I'll fix this," he insisted. "Trust me." "Trust?" she said, tears streaming down her face. "How can I trust you, Ethan?" He stood in silence, unable to find an answer. Lila closed the suitcase and brushed past him. Ethan tried to stop her, but her resolve was unshakable. "I need to think about my child and my dignity," she said. "And here, I have neither." She walked out of the front door, leaving Ethan standing alone in the empty mansion. The mansion stood quiet as Lila walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the vast emptiness. He stood there, staring at the closed door, the silence amplifying the weight of her absence. In the days that followed, the scandal surrounding their arrangement exploded. The press was ruthless, dissecting every detail of their lives. Ethan's carefully curated public image took hit after hit. Headlines mocked him, tabloids speculated endlessly, but none of it mattered to him anymore. The only thought consuming Ethan was Lila. He called her repeatedly, but his calls went unanswered. Each failed attempt reminded him of how deeply he had hurt her. Ethan knew he had crossed a line. His obsession with revenge had destroyed something real before it even had a chance to grow. One rainy morning, Ethan made a decision. For the first time, he stepped away from the control and strategies that had always defined him. He drove through the rain-soaked streets to the modest apartment Lila had rented in a quiet neighborhood. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "I need to talk to you," Ethan said, his voice low and filled with emotion. Before she could shut the door, he added, "Please." Reluctantly, Lila stepped aside to let him in. "I was wrong," Ethan began, standing in her small, humble living room, a stark contrast to the opulence he was used to. "From the beginning, I used you as part of a selfish plan, and that was unforgivable. But, Lila, you've changed everything." Lila crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "Changed everything? You mean I was just a convenient part of your scheme?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "I mean you showed me what strength looks like, what honesty feels like. You showed me what it means to care about something real." He hesitated, then added, "For the first time in my life, I want something genuine. I want you." Lila stared at him, her emotions conflicted. She wanted to tell him to leave, but something in his voice made her pause. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Ethan continued, "but I'm going to fight for you. For us. This won't be easy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied. "I don't want easy. I just want a chance." Lila sighed deeply. For the first time since leaving the mansion, she felt a flicker of hope. The truth was now out, painful as it was, but it also meant there was an opportunity to rebuild, stronger than before. As Ethan sat in his car outside her apartment later that night, watching the quiet activity of the neighborhood, he reflected on the man he had been. Losing Lila had taught him that rebuilding what he had broken would take more than words. It would take action. In the days following their conversation, Ethan began to distance himself from the life he had built around control. For the first time, he delegated responsibilities at his company and focused on something bigger, showing Lila that his intentions were genuine. He knew earning back her trust wouldn't be easy, and she had every reason to doubt him. Lila, on the other hand, struggled with her own emotions. Since the day Ethan had appeared at her door, something inside her had shifted. No matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, a part of her wanted to believe in his sincerity. One morning, Lila received an unexpected envelope. Her name was written in a familiar hand, and the note inside was simple. "I'd like you to be there tonight. I don't want to pressure you, but this is important to me. Ethan." She hesitated, unsure of what to expect. But the tone of his words felt different, and curiosity got the better of her. When Lila arrived at the address in the invitation, she was stunned to find a public garden transformed. The once simple space was now adorned with flowers, glowing string lights, and freshly painted benches. In the center stood a small stage surrounded by curious neighbors and passers-by. Lila walked cautiously toward the stage, unsure of what was happening. Then she saw Ethan standing there. He was dressed simply, a stark departure from his usual polished appearance, and somehow, it made him look more human. "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice carrying through the microphone. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here." He paused, taking a deep breath. The nervousness in his demeanor was something Lila had never seen before. "There's something I need to say," he continued, his eyes locking on Lila in the front row. "And I want to say it as honestly as I can." Lila's heart pounded as he spoke, her confusion giving way to a whirlwind of emotions. "For most of my life, I thought I could control everything. People, situations, emotions. I treated them like pieces on a chessboard to get what I wanted. But in doing that, I made terrible mistakes. The worst was hurting someone who didn't deserve it." The crowd remained silent, captivated by his words. Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his tone. "I've spent so long chasing success, power, and revenge, but none of it matters. Not without something real. And I found that in you, Lila." Lila felt her heart pounding in her chest as Ethan's words resonated in the quiet garden. "But then I met someone who made me realize that life isn't a transaction," Ethan said, his eyes locked on hers. "Lila, you showed me that there's strength in authenticity, that I don't need to hide my flaws to be worthy of something real." He paused, summoning the courage to continue. "I wronged you. I was selfish, arrogant, and blind to everything you represented. But now, all I want is a second chance. Not to fix what I've done. I know I can't erase the past, but to build something real from here on." Tears streamed down Lila's face, the wave of emotions overwhelming her. "This garden," Ethan said, gesturing around them, "it's where we first met. Not literally, but it represents how you came into my life. With simplicity, beauty, and strength. I wanted it to be a symbol of what we can build together." The crowd began to applaud, but Lila could barely hear it over the pounding of her own heart. Her hands trembled as Ethan stepped off the stage and walked toward her. "I know I can't ask you to forgive me easily," he said, now face to face with her. "But if you give me the chance, I promise to do everything I can to be the man you deserve." For a long moment, Lila was silent, processing everything. Finally, she took a deep breath and replied, "Ethan, you hurt me in ways I can't even explain. But something has changed. You've changed. And if this is real, maybe we can try." Ethan's smile was immediate, but there was a humility in his expression that showed he understood he'd need to fight for her trust every day. That night, as they walked together through the garden, Lila felt, for the first time, that they were beginning to build something genuine. Ethan had let go of his pride, and she was willing to give him a second chance. It wouldn't be easy, but both of them knew they were ready to try. The sun shone brightly over the newly renovated garden of Ethan's estate. What was once a decorative afterthought now symbolized so much more: Ethan and Lila's fresh start. The scent of flowers filled the air, mingling with Lila's soft laughter as she lounged on a deck chair, gently caressing her visibly pregnant belly. Ethan sat beside her, a serene expression on his face, something rarely seen before. He held a book about parenting, an act that would have been unthinkable for a man who once lived solely for work and power. "You look more nervous than I am," Lila teased, watching him anxiously flip through the pages. "I want to be prepared," he replied with a faint smile. "I've made too many mistakes to risk not doing this right." Lila reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "The fact that you care already says so much. Our child will be lucky to have you as their father." Her words brought an unexpected warmth to Ethan's heart. He knew he still carried the weight of his past mistakes, but he was determined to be a better man, not just for Lila, but for himself and the child about to be born. A few days later, the calm that had enveloped their lives gave way to frantic commotion. Lila went into labor in the middle of the night, and despite all his preparations, Ethan couldn't hide his initial panic. He called the doctor while rushing her to the hospital, gripping her hand tightly the entire way. "Breathe, Lila. Everything's going to be fine," he said, trying to reassure her, though his own voice shook. "I am breathing," she shot back, her tone a mix of pain and irritation. "You should try doing the same." When they arrived at the hospital, time seemed to move in slow motion for Ethan. The image of Lila in the delivery room, fighting to bring their child into the world, was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Hours later, the sound of a newborn's cry filled the room. Nathan had arrived. The doctor handed the baby to Ethan, who stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe he was holding his son. He looked over at Lila, exhausted but smiling, and felt something he had never experienced before. Pure, genuine happiness, completely free of ambition or ego. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gently placed Nathan into Lila's arms. In that moment, everything made sense to him. What once seemed so important, control, success, revenge, now felt insignificant compared to the life they had just created. In the months that followed, Ethan began to reshape his life to prioritize Lila and Nathan. He delegated significant responsibilities at work, something he had once thought impossible, and meticulously structured his schedule to ensure he was home every evening. Lila, in turn, found her own balance. With Ethan's support, she started a small landscaping business, a long-held dream she had never had the means or confidence to pursue. As for Emma, she eventually realized she had permanently lost Ethan's attention. Her final attempts at manipulation were met with cold indifference, and she quietly faded from their lives, accepting that she no longer had a place in Ethan's story. One serene afternoon, Ethan and Lila strolled through the garden, Nathan cradled in Ethan's arms. The baby gazed curiously at the vibrant flowers, his tiny hands reaching toward the blossoms. Lila walked beside them, her smile warm as she watched Ethan pointing out each flower as though it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Who would have thought you'd be so good with flowers?" Lila teased, resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. "It's not about the flowers," Ethan replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "It's about what they mean to us." The garden, once a symbol of a relationship forged out of self-interest, had become a sanctuary of genuine love and redemption. To Ethan, every bloom represented a choice he had made to change. To Lila, they were a testament that even the most complicated stories could blossom into something beautiful. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the garden in shades of gold and orange, they sat together on the soft grass. Nathan slept peacefully in Lila's arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the breeze. "Do you think he'll love flowers?" Lila asked softly, her voice full of wonder. "He'll love them," Ethan replied with a smile, "because he'll learn from the best." Lila looked at Ethan and saw not the arrogant, calculating man she had once known, but someone who had chosen to grow, to change, and to love. Their life wouldn't be perfect. No life ever was. but they had found the strength to face any challenge together. Nathan wasn't just a new beginning. He was proof that even after the fiercest storms, there was always a chance for something new to bloom. Thank you for joining us for today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more heartfelt stories like this. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.